What's up, gamers? Welcome back to 180 MTG. My name is Ryan Overturf, and this week I'm talking about multiplayer Magic. And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about Commander Cube. I'm not even talking about designing for multiplayer. I definitely have some thoughts I could share on that, but they're pretty straightforward. I mean, just stuff with one target is worse if you have multiple opponents, stuff that says each opponent is stronger. It's not that hard to figure that stuff out. I'm just talking about playing multiplayer games because I think that that's something that can be really fun, playing with more than two players in the same game. It becomes more of a social experience, and that's how I started playing Magic. When I got into Magic in the early 2000s, I was in high school, I had some friends that played the game, we barely had an awareness of the competitive formats, and the casual formats were nowhere near as fleshed out as they are now. This is before Commander, before it was even Elder Dragon Highlander. That just didn't even exist. So we mostly just played 3 or 4 player free for all games. That's just what Magic was to us. And that's something that's always been really fun to me. Last week I talked about the Omniscience stack, which is a cube that lends itself very naturally to playing multiplayer. But I generally just think that any cube, almost any cube, could be used to just play multiplayer games. And I actually got thinking about multiplayer and how I wanted to talk about that in the cube context early last year playing my pre-modern Tubert. That cube has cards that only existed when I started playing the game or shortly thereafter. I was on a cube getaway with some friends and we did a draft where we were sitting at this larger circular table. So that was really good for drafting and passing packs, but it's not the best kind of surface for playing two-player games. So we were talking about moving and getting set up so we could play a kind of a round robin thing. And I just said, well, I mean, we're already here. What if we just played a four-player free-for-all game? And that was one of the most fun games of Magic I played last year. That cube is not designed at all with any sensibilities for multiplayer Magic. I was like a blue-red counter burn deck. I both did not have great tools for beating multiple opponents. And I also, we were drafting 40 card decks. I had Factor Fiction that I was worried about resolving because I thought it was a really very real possibility that I could deck myself before I could eliminate 3 other players. And it just ended up being this kind of chaotic, really fun game. So I just want to talk about different ways to play with different number of players and finding the fun with Magic that way. So let's dig in. What I'm going to be doing today is just going by numbers of players and talking about my favorite ways to play with that number of players, and maybe even some ideas I have kicking around in my head, and what I see as appealing or what you might see as challenging with that number of players, starting with 3-player games. This is something I'm often asked about when it comes to how do you draft with 3 players, and I really don't have a good draft methodology for 3. I'm sure that there's people who do. You're welcome to share whatever your thoughts are on drafting with 3. Personally, when it comes to 3, the only 3-player games I have played recently have been with the Omniscience stack, and we just grab 40 card decks, just fully random 40 card decks. Pretty easy to do with the Omniscience emblem there. I think if I was going to do a 3-player free-for-all game, I might try to figure out drafting it, but even just doing 3 sealed decks is a pretty reasonable approach to it. I think that that is a kind of a fun way to do it, especially with a Tubert, just divvying that up into 3 60-card sealed pools and building decks out of that. That seems like a pretty reasonable starting point for playing 3-player games. For the actual games, I think that what makes the most sense to me, it's not that complicated for 3 players. You don't have to increment life totals. You just play a free-for-all game, 20 life, 7 card hands. Player who goes first does draw on the first turn of the game because you have multiple opponents. You technically are a bit advantaged playing first, but if it looks very pronounced, then the other 2 players can just team up on you. So that stuff kind of all balances itself out. What is potentially unappealing about 3-player games is sometimes one of the seat ends up in what's called a king-making situation, where they can't necessarily win themselves, but they have a lot of influence over which of the other 2 players win. That's not the most fun thing when it comes up, but it can be kind of fun in a spiteful kind of way. There's a little bit of politicking going on there. When it comes to multiplayer games, there's usually some element of politics. With different player counts, there's different ways that you can play that do kind of correct for that. With 3 players, I haven't found anything or heard anything that really finesses that away. It only comes up so often. I think generally 3 player games tend to be competitive or one player totally runs away with it. And when it happens with only 3 players, the games aren't that long anyway, so it's not that concerning to me. Just 3 players, free for all, 20 life points, nothing fancy there. It's a pretty reasonable way. This is probably the way that I played the most when I was playing kitchen table magic when I first started playing. It was pretty typical for us just to have 3 people together and we would just play with our deck. And that's what Magic was. So I have a lot of experience with this. It doesn't require anything fancy and it is pretty fun. 4 players is where you do end up in a situation where the politics really become a factor of the multiplayer game. And this is an aspect that I think turns a lot of people off from playing Commander and definitely from playing competitive EDH, CEDH as it's called, because so much of the game is just about the table talk. And when you play a 4 player free for all game, that is some of what you're signing up for. It can be really fun when you're playing with people who are pretty like minded, people that are pretty chill and relaxed. I think the more competitive the atmosphere gets, the less fun the politicking can be. It is really easy to set up and just do the 4 player free for all game. And when you do a draft for that, just do any regular draft. For 4 player drafts, I like to draft 5 9 card packs and just any kind of cube. You can just sit down and do this. And it's pretty fun if everybody is into it. If you want to play a 4 player game with less politics, a fun thing that tends to be an aspect of every pre-release is Two-Headed Giant. I'm going to have some links in the show notes for the rules of different environments that I talk about today. Two-Headed Giant is one where you have 2 player teams. You have a slightly higher shared life total for your team. I believe you start with 30 life. Same deal, 7 card hands. You don't draw first when you're playing first because it is just 2 teams. Turns are taken simultaneously, and anything that says each opponent is going to increment for both of your opponents on the Two-Headed Giant team. That's a fun way to do it. It's something that I generally only really do at pre-release. For the most part, these days, when I have 4 players together, I do just want to do a traditional cube draft and play 1v1 matches across the different opponents. But Two-Headed Giant's a fun way to spice things up, and if you're really feeling feisty, if you like the politics, the 4 player free-for-all game, again, that's another kind of free-for-all multiplayer game that I have a lot of experience with, certainly back from when I started playing Magic, and that game with the pre-modern tuber last year was just a ton of fun, but you have to have an appetite for the politics for that 4 player free-for-all game. You're going to end up in situations where players will attack you or will offer not to attack you if you do or don't counter their spell or kill their creatures. It's just going to be a part of it in those free-for-all games. So if you don't like that, then of course that's not going to be for you. If you want to try multiplayer without politics, Two-Headed Giant is the way that I would go. And Two-Headed Giant is definitely something you can design for. It's something that different sets will have cards that have more or less each opponent kind of stuff. Sweepers tend to be more meaningful than single target removals, or just ways to generate card advantage tend to be more important when you have multiple opponents. A Two-Headed Giant style cube sounds like it could be something that's really fun. I just have a lot of ways that I'm already really excited to play with 4 players, so I don't spend a ton of time innovating this space myself or paying much attention to the innovations of others. 4 players is the most common commander pod size, so a lot of 4 player games are going to be in a commander cube, so there's not a ton of light that I feel I need to shine here, but I do just want to say a 4 player free-for-all game is a pretty fun way to play Magic if you're into it. 5 players is where things start to get really spicy, and if you just play a 5 player free-for-all game, when I first was getting into EDH, we had a variable number of people that would show up. The games get more chaotic, and you have more downtime as well when you just add more players to those free-for-all style setups. I don't like playing 5 or more free-for-all. It's just less of a game and more of an exercise in waiting to take your turn, I find. But there are some fun modifications for 5 players. My favorite is Star Magic. I am often trying to get my local play group to play Star Magic. I'll go over how that one works. So it's 5 players. You start with 20 life, 7 cards, the very basic stuff. It's multiplayer, so you will draw on your first turn. But the way the game is set up is with the 5 points of a star, your two neighbors, your two neighboring points on the star, they are technically your opponents, but you don't have to eliminate them. Your two opposite points on the star, those are fully your opponents. If you eliminate the two players opposite you before any other player eliminates the two players opposite them, you win the game. And the way that that goes, there's overlap. Each of your opponents that you're trying to eliminate also has two other players that has them as an opponent in common. So you're kind of working together with your neighbors on one of your opponents you're trying to eliminate, but then they are also trying to make it work out so that one of your opponents stays in while they can eliminate both of their opponents. So there's both an aspect of competition and collaboration. It's not fully to the point of politicking and collusion that you get with a free-for-all game, because you do just have the same goal in common. You're trying to eliminate the same player. But there's some trickery, trying to obfuscate what your power is, how quickly you can eliminate your other opponent. Mostly you are just playing your cards and evaluating the situation face up and just trying to reach your goal of eliminating your opponents. But then there's a little bit going on where somebody who is technically not somebody you're trying to eliminate might interfere with your plans because you could win before they do. And I find that that game is really fun. You have to have an appetite for playing the 5-player game, but I adore Star Magic. I've been a big fan of playing Star Magic with the Omniscience stack. Initially, I wanted to make sure with that design to get enough cards to play Star Magic. I might have actually played more Star Magic with that cube than any other way to play Magic. Just generally, I'm always advocating for Star Magic anytime I'm in a group where there's 5 players who want to play. And then also, anytime I see a weirder environment, I do try to make a push to play Star Magic. A few years ago, on our annual cube getaway, a friend had put together a cube using only cards from 7th, 8th, and 9th edition, which he mostly did as a bit, largely because almost every card from those sets is super cheap, barring 7th edition foils. But this was just like an unsleeved, non-foil, a lot of really simple, common cards from those core sets. And when we ended up playing Star Magic I was the one championing playing Star Magic. And after the first game, it was just really fun because your cards are so weak, it's hard to eliminate multiple players. And so you end up in a lot of games that take many turns and you're trying to navigate everybody's goals and how quickly they can eliminate their two opponents. And we ended up just playing a lot of Star Magic with that cube that weekend. And that was super fun. I'm just a huge fan of Star Magic. It is the type of Magic that, relative to the amount that I enjoy it, is probably played the least by both myself and other players. And I do just want to spread the good word of Star Magic. I think that it's super fun. So Star Magic is maybe the ideal form of Magic the Gathering. Certainly my favorite way to play with 5. But I've had this idea kicking around in my head that I want to share here for something that I haven't fleshed out, but does speak to me as something that could be a really cool casual variant. The idea is that I want to develop a format around the card Strixhaven Stadium. Something about this card really speaks to me as a fun way to play casual Magic with an alternate kind of win condition. So this is a 3-mana artifact. It taps for a colorless, and you put a point counter on Strixhaven Stadium. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, remove a point counter from Strixhaven Stadium. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, put a point counter on Strixhaven Stadium. Then, if it has 10 or more point counters on it, remove them all, and that player loses the game. Something about an environment where everybody starts with Strixhaven Stadium in play really sounds appealing and fun to me. And you're navigating this mini game, both of trying to get your own stadium up to 10 counters to eliminate players, and trying to defend yourself from players attacking you and removing the counters from your stadium. I don't know exactly what this would have to look like. I think that there's some issues with drafting with 5, like you could just introduce this to a larger cube. I don't necessarily know how this works with drafting. You'd have to really design around this thing in mind. I think that if you let players build their own decks, then there's going to be some people showing up with just like a combo deck that completely ignores the premise and maybe takes advantage of just having this colorless rock that you start the game with. I think doing something with like pre-constructed decks, I mean, just going from Strixhaven, you could build a deck for each of the five enemy colored schools of magic. I think doing something just one for every mono color could be really appealing there. You might want to modulate life totals so life points are higher, so it's harder to win without using the stadium itself, or maybe just have a rule where players can only be eliminated from the game by the resolution of a Strixhaven stadium. I'm not really sure, but I do like the idea of, I think, pre-constructed decks in some capacity, and then you could play. I think this is probably bad for two players. It could technically work, and then it gets more fun with three, four, and five. And I think that only having creatures with one power makes a lot of sense to me. And that's a way to make it so if you have life totals and they matter, it's very unlikely you're just going to deal lethal combat damage to a player. They just have more life to give away when you hit them with the stadium. I don't know. I haven't ever sat out to flesh this out, but every time I think about it, it seems really fun to me. I'm just not sure that I have a play group with an appetite for it. I'm not sure if I want to try to make it something where you draft or something with pre-constructed decks. If I did pre-constructed decks, I don't know how many colors to make them. I just want to put this idea out there because it does sound really fun to me, and hopefully somebody else can do something with the idea. I'm probably going to spend some time sketching it out now that I have spoken it publicly, but I'm not sure. This one's going to take some time to marinate. So definitely let me know your thoughts on that. But I think that that could be a really fun multiplayer Magic variant. When you get up to 6 players, there is a variant called Emperor. The way that Emperor works is you have 3-player teams. One of the players, the player in the middle on each team, is the Emperor. And the other 2 players on each of their sides, they're the lieutenants, the guardians, the generals. They seem to be called the generals. The last time that I remember enjoying Emperor, this is one that I think gets mentioned a lot. It's one that I think that we played on occasion in the old EDH days, but I specifically remember shortly after the Mirrodin Besieged pre-release. This was during the glory days of Original Recipe for Loco, and during the Mirrodin Besieged pre-release, they were doing this gimmick with the set where the set after Mirrodin Besieged was either going to be Mirrodin Pure or what it ended up being New Phyrexia. So they tried to make it ambiguous who was going to win this war, even though it was kind of loud that they were scaling up the presence of Phyrexians from Scars of Mirrodin to Mirrodin Besieged. I think everybody kind of knew it was going to be New Phyrexia, but the prize packs for the Mirrodin Besieged pre-release, you could choose Mirrodin Pure boosters or New Phyrexia boosters, and they would have cards with either the Mirrodin or the Phyrexian watermark. They would just have more representation of whichever faction that you chose. Those packs, I believe today, if you could find a sealed booster of either, are outrageously expensive. They were only given away from this one event. And what we did with the packs that we won at the pre-release is we built sealed decks and played Emperor. No idea what the games were like. I think that my introduction to Emperor here demonstrates that I barely remember the rules. There's kind of a lot of crunchiness with Emperor. I don't actually think that Emperor is that fun. At least I don't enjoy Emperor very much. It's a little bit too crunchy in the rule space. It has 2 teams, so there's not really politicking going on. You get around that, but there's a lack of familiarity and resonance with the rules. I don't recommend Emperor for that way. At least I can tell you that I don't enjoy it. When it comes to 6, I just want to do a regular 6-player draft, maybe do 3v3 teams. You can play simultaneously that way and just have independent games. But I can't really advocate, at least in terms of how I enjoy spending my free time, 6-player free-for-all games. They're just even more downtime and chaos than 5-player games. Or Emperor, which is a little bit crunchy in terms of rules. I'm going to have a link to the rules in the show notes if you want to read more about them. I would have to be reading them myself, and I don't love that way to play Magic. When it comes to 6, I am less interested in playing multiplayer. If somebody leaves, then great, we get to play Star Magic. But at 6, I just kind of want to play regular games personally. When you get up to 7 players, I'm not aware of any specific way to play 7 player multiplayer. When we have 7 players locally, I will often joke about entering the Septagon. It doesn't mean anything. I think it sounds cool. I would like to have a 7 player multiplayer Magic format, but I don't. If I did, it would be called the Septagon. That's what I have for 7. Really, with 7, you can just do a regular draft. Somebody sits out between matches, and as soon as a match is over, they get to tag in against one of the players that just finished. You can generally keep up a pretty healthy rotation, just keep playing regular games with 7. Okay, update on this. The night that I recorded the rest of this podcast, I rolled up to the weekly gamer hang with the Omniscient stack, and we just happened to have 7 players, and people just wanted to play that cube, and we just played a 7 player free for all game. I have officially entered the Septagon. So we just randomized 40 card decks. 7 players, free for all, 20 life points, and it ended up being pretty fun. We ended up playing 3 7 player free for all games last night, and because of the Omniscient stack not having lands, there's a lot less fiddliness in the gameplay. 3 card opening hands, things move pretty quickly, even with that many players. So those 3 games, it was under 2 hours total to play 3 total games. The one thing I'll say about it is you end up having kind of a lot of downtime when you're eliminated. I didn't win any of the games, so I experienced this in all of them, where I would be eliminated and be sitting around for kind of a while before the next game could start. But you can just start playing a different game while you wait. It's not the worst thing in the world. I can't imagine that we will be playing too many 7 player free-for-all games in the future. That just kind of lined up with how many people were there, and it was fun to try once. Maybe we'll do it again. I think that you really need some kind of gimmick that increases the general pace of the gameplay. So the Omniscient stack, just having the infinite mana and having much higher impact spells goes a long way in making it actually work. But it's all just to say I have officially entered the Septagon. 7 player free for all is nonsense under the normal constraints of Magic the Gathering. But if you have some kind of gimmick to speed it up, it can be pretty fun and kind of hilarious. And then when you get to 8, that's of course the number for a traditional draft. If you're so inclined, you could break that into 2 multiplayer games. Certainly, if you're doing a commander cube, you could just have 2 pods of 4. That makes a lot of sense. For the most part, though, 8, that's just a healthy number, and you start breaking into smaller games. But I do want to shout out one monumentally, logistically complex format when you get to a lot of players, something called Grand Melee. I've never played it myself. I have an awareness of it because when I got into the game, I would read a lot of Brian David Marshall's articles on the Mothership. Grand Melees are something that I believe that he ran at Neutral Ground in New York many years ago before I even started playing the game. It's something that I believe he's tried to do and maybe has run at some Magic Cons recently, doing like a sealed deck box league kind of thing. But what Grand Melee is, I'm going to have a link to the rules in the show notes, but basically you have an influence of 1, you sit in a big circle, you have a bunch of players, I think 10 or more is what it's designed for, and your cards and the players you can attack are only the players immediately to your left and your right, and as you eliminate players, then you can start to interact with the next player over, and then they also do something where there's like a turn tracker that gets passed around. So multiple turns are happening at the same time to account for how many players there are. So that starts to catch up with some of the downtime and the chaos of 1 turn at a time, 6 or 7 multiplayer games, which are just kind of logistically really slow. Grand Melee is complicated, but if you have somebody that knows what they're doing that has those turn markers going, I believe that it can be run smoothly, but that's more of an event than it is just a casual game night. For the most part, today I've just been talking about things that you could easily do at a game night. Grand Melee is something that requires a bit more organization, but if it sounds fun to you, definitely look into it. It's something that I've never done. I'd be willing to try it once. At least once. We'd see how it goes. But I don't know too much about that. But it is just something to think about if you want to play large multiplayer games. And that's my breakdown of multiplayer Magic formats that I personally enjoy with the different number of players that you might end up with. There's definitely a lot of other ways to do it. This list is by no means meant to be comprehensive. This podcast is just an outlet for me to share the things that I enjoy. I was most excited today to talk about Star Magic and to just post that idea about Strixhaven Stadium as the potential foundation for another casual Magic format, something that I'd be interested in exploring and maybe other people would find interesting. But a note that I want to share here, I don't necessarily see a need to talk about designing for multiplayer necessarily. It's something that I haven't spent a lot of time on. I don't generally consider myself an expert to the extent that I have some thoughts on practices that are better and worse for multiplayer. But I do want to encourage you, if you're experimenting in very strange cube space. I was talking about the 7th, 8th, ninth edition cube being something that we ended up really enjoying playing Star Magic with. I specifically wanted to pair this episode around the same time that I did an episode on the Omniscient stack because it's such a bizarre way to play Magic. It ends up being really fun to play multiplayer just because of the inherent wackiness with the format. And you might have a format that's particularly out there that lends itself better or worse to playing multiplayer. I don't really want to speak to what makes a format better for multiplayer, but I want to come at this from the other side and say if you have an environment that you're working on and you're not really sure how to develop it, maybe it's rough around the edges, maybe it's really weird, you're not sure how it's going to play, a fun way to start playing is just to do a draft and just play multiplayer because it takes a lot of the edge off of playing two-player games of Magic. If we're playing a two-player game and my deck doesn't really work or have some cards in my deck that are kind of questionable, the kind of things that are not going to be long for the environment, or maybe just because of a lack of familiarity, I just train wrecked my draft, the games are pretty unengaging. I'll have draw steps where I draw a card that's not really going to play. It's pretty deflating. It's not very fun to engage with that when you really can't win. Adding more players, that does really reduce the pressure on a given draw step or really just an entire deck to perform because you no longer just have to defeat one opponent. I mean, this is really the thing that people love about Commander. I could say a lot of things that I think that the format gets right. I want to give a lot of praise to the format for fully embracing Singleton and making every draw step more exciting in that way. Definitely having the commander and having it so you can really relate to a deck and have a face of the deck, that's really smart. There's a lot going on with commander that I think that they got right, but just playing multiplayer and making it so you don't just have to be singularly focused on defeating your opponent opens up space to just have a lot more fun with the game of Magic. Like when we were playing that 7th, 8th, and ninth edition cube, there was certainly a significant power level disparity between the commons and the rares, and that's kind of an aspect of limited, but back then when the commons were so simple, I draw Grizzly Bear, we get to a point in the game where it's Grizzly Bear versus Thorn Elemental. It's comical having one of those cards trying to compete with the other. There's not a lot going on there, but when you remove the heads up aspect and there's more players and the politics is a part of this, and some players aren't really going to like that. Again, Star Magic doesn't really lend itself as much to that, but it does come up definitely when players have the same opponent in common that they will team up on somebody who is clearly just in a better position. But it is just fun on its own to be the player who has the grizzly bear and being like, why would you attack me? I got this crappy little tutu. And just getting to do please like that, and they can actually impact the game. You can make those jokes in a two-player game, but your opponent's just going to beat you, right? Because that's their only goal. That's the only thing going on. Their entire objective is win the game. You are their only obstacle. When you add more players, it does open up a lot more space for joking around and making silly plays. You can make a suboptimal silly play in a two-player game. It's just weirder, right? Like you can do it, but it'll often really just feel like you're checking out and not really engaging with the game. And typically, it means that you have enough leeway that you can afford to make some silly plays. When it comes to a multiplayer game, there's just more going on, multiple players that are trying to accomplish similar objectives, while importantly navigating what's going on with the other players at the table and their objectives as well. And when it comes to Commander, players that have a lot of experience in Commander, this is something I actually really trust my friend Andy to design fun cubes largely because of the work that he does on Commander. Because Commander has this attitude where players are trying to get together and share an experience and tell a story. There's less motivation necessarily to winning the game. Some people even show up with decks that aren't trying to win at all, but you don't really even need that to make multiplayer more fun. It's just that it really massages a lot of the pressure. The stakes are lower. What you do doesn't have to be as focused. You don't just have to be cutthroat trying to win the game. You're able to just play in the space more. Multiplayer Magic is just more casual and relaxed. And with high power cubes, if you're somebody that really enjoys playing Vintage Cube, or somebody that likes to play for stakes, or somebody who this is your competitive outlet, absolutely. I like playing 1v1 cube games. I try to win when I'm playing 1v1 cube games. But as far as just a fun game night, I do think that multiplayer Magic is as good as it's ever been. The kid in me kind of comes out and I get to play those multiplayer games. And I have a ton of fun playing 3-player free for all, 4-player free for all, Star Magic. It's all great. I recommend just trying it sometime. If it's not really your thing, just to take the edge off, just to have a silly night. Definitely, if the stars align and you find yourself on a cube night, you're trying to get more players, you end up with 5, just give Star Magic a chance. I can't promise that you'll like it, but everybody that I've got to try it has enjoyed it. 100% success rate, and a lot of that is attitude. I think if you want to have fun with it, you will have fun with it. Magic is, at the end of the day, a game that we play, hopefully, for fun. I think competitive players can have a reputation where they don't seem to be having as much fun with the game, but even casual players can really lose sight of that. I recommend, at least from time to time, really embracing the lightness, the silliness, the goofiness of Magic, and even just in the way that you play. And playing multiplayer Magic is, in my experience, one of the best ways to do that and really embrace the fun of the game. And remember why at least I started playing in the first place. This is a fun way to hang out with your friends. And that's going to do it. A short one for me here. I'm actually recording this. I'm a week ahead, which is pretty rare for me. I'm getting ahead of some travel, doing some commentary. I guess this is going to release while I'm on my way back from Magic Spotlight the Avatar in Atlanta. So if you watched that show, I hope that you enjoyed it. I'm hoping that I had a fun time covering Standard and that things are in a better place with that format than they were at Worlds. But either way, I'm hoping to play some casual Magic. Maybe I'll play some Star Magic while I'm out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today, for doing everything you do to support the podcast, liking, reviewing, sharing, commenting, subscribing, all that jazz. And I will be back next week talking more Cube. Later, gamers.